Happy Sunday afternoon. It is Bible recap time. Day 4, we read Job. We skipped over from Genesis to Job, chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So, if you've never read Job, it is a book of poetry, but not the kind of poetry that we think of. It's very dark. So what happens is God sees one of his adversaries, and he asks him, "What have you been doing?" And his adversary says he's been roaming the earth. So we refer to this as Satan, which Tara-Leigh Cobble sort of gets into that later on in the recap, how there probably are many Satans. But anyway, Satan wants to test Job. He knows that Job is a faithful servant of God's, but he believes that if he tests him enough, that he will no longer be a faithful servant of God's. And God knows how blameless Job is, so he allows Satan to test him. And the way he tests him is, actually, let me back up just a second. When the adversary, Satan, wants to test somebody, God actually offers up Job, okay? He says, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And when I first read that, I was like, what? God's offering Job up to Satan on a platter? Like, what in the world is happening? But God knows the kind of relationship that he's had with Job, and he limits what Satan can do. He tells Satan, you cannot take his life. So Satan takes everything else but his life. I mean, he takes all of his possessions. He takes all of his children. He ends up like putting boils, these big sores on his body. So Job is just sitting there grieving and mourning, and he's got all these sores over his body. And so he takes this broken pottery and he's scraping at it. You know, like if you ever get bitten by a bunch of fire ants, or you have some kind of rash that itches and you're just like scratching at it. It feels so good when you're scratching at it. Well, that's what he's doing. His wife is no help, because his wife is like saying to him, you should just curse God and die. Like, she's no comfort at all. So he sits there, and he's doing pretty good. I mean, he's not blaming God. He even still worships God. But then his 3 friends come to comfort him, because they've heard about what has happened. So in chapter 2, they come to comfort him, and they sit there for 7 days and 7 nights with Job, and they comfort him just by sitting there. Like, not saying anything, just sitting there. And just like Tara-Leigh Cobble said, everything was going fine until they started to speak. So we find out in today's reading that only one of them speaks. The other 2 will have their turn later on. But in chapter 3, Job finally just curses the day that he was born. He said that he would be at peace if he had died at birth. You know, and hadn't we all possibly felt like that at some point in our lives, if we've been through some kind of traumatic experience or some kind of loss or tragedy? You know, I know that I've been there, where I just thought, if I was already in heaven, I wouldn't be going through this, and I wouldn't feel this pain and feel all this suffering. So we go on to chapter 4, and this is when the first of his friends starts speaking out, and his name is Eliphaz, okay? So he starts out lifting Job up. He's encouraging him, okay? He's telling him, you know, remember, you have encouraged people before, and you have given other people strength. Like, he's really lifting him up as a friend. But then he starts saying that the upright aren't destroyed. So I was like, well, like, are you telling Job that he must not be upright because he's being destroyed? And then he explains that he had a vision about all of this, that a spirit came to him. In chapter 5, the last chapter that we read today, he tells Job to go to God about it. And then he praises God. He says all these things that God has done and all these great and wonderful things about God. But then he sort of talks to Job like he's blaming him. And let me just tell you that in this study guide that I also bought, that you could get, you know, if you want to, it just has questions each day after the reading. Like today, there were 9 questions. But the one that I want to tell you about is, it tells us to look up the word Satan in a Hebrew lexicon. So when I looked it up to see what it meant, it means adversary or accuser, to oppose or obstruct. And then these were all the names that were written for an adversary or for Satan. Prince of power of the air, father of lies, serpent, roaring lion, tempter, ruler of demons, God of this age, and the evil one. So Satan has a lot of names, and he comes in a lot of forms, and usually in a lot of our lives, he comes masquerading as light, right? He just takes what's good and he just twists it just a little bit so that we're not really sure. Anyway, this was a good reading today. Job is hard for me to read because I know that, well, I'm not going to spoil it for you if you've never read it yet, so I'll wait until then, but it's a hard book for me to read. I feel so sorry for Job, and I remember, I've said before, God, please, please, I don't want to be like Job. I don't want to be like Job. Anyway, it's a good reading. I hope you enjoy this video. Let me know if you're doing the Bible recap. Let me know if you've already done the Bible recap, or if you're doing another study of the Bible this year. Like, what are your plans for the year 2026? How are you going to dig deeper into God's Word? How are you going to just make sure that you read God's Word? So let me know, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Bye.